Hi Najat. I'm really excited to be here on stage with you. So could you start us off with telling who Najat is, where you come from in like 90 seconds, and do also talk about the 2 C-suite titles you have.
90 seconds, that's a short period of time. So Najat Khan, I'm the Chief R&D Officer and Chief Commercial Officer at Recursion. Recursion is a biotech company leveraging AI. It's a clinical stage public company. In terms of the 2 C-suite titles, look, I think we have had so many conversations about the importance of really connecting the first mile, which is research, what's driving the disease, all the way to the last mile, which is getting the medicines to patients. And that's always been my passion my entire life, and these roles coming together is unique in industry, but I think we should be seeing more of that because that's how you ensure the development of medicines is done in a connected and thoughtful way end to end. But this is a common theme in my career. Prior to Recursion, I was at J&J Innovative Medicines for over 6 years, and I also had 2 hats. I was the global head of R&D strategy in the portfolio organization, which is essentially like what are the decision makings we do in terms of where we go from a therapeutic perspective, but also the programs that we progress, don't progress, and also in license and externalize, so forth. I was also the chief data science officer, heading up all elements of AI, machine learning, and R&D. So again, I think it's a common theme if you go back even further in terms of my background, PhD in organic chemistry, background in computer science, and then also a lot of business and leadership in the industry. 3 elements coming together. I do think that it is at the intersection of different disciplines that allow us to have a true appreciation, not just for the technical aspects and to innovate, so computer science and science coming together, but then also to innovate with a purpose in mind. What is the value creation you can drive? And that's where the business aspect comes in. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. Just to build on that, in what ways do you envision that your experience from J&J will impact Recursion?
Yeah, look, one of the things that I really appreciated among many things being at J&J is drug discovery and development is extremely hard. It's one of the most humbling experiences in terms of how do you innovate to build an industry-leading pipeline, which I was fortunate to be a part of at J&J. And at Recursion, you have a platform that is extremely unique in terms of industrializing drug discovery, doing that at scale using AI and machine learning from the get-go.
Yep.
How do we better understand biology using multi-omics? How do we better design molecules using generative AI and active learning? We can talk more about it. And how do you innovate development in a different way? But at the end of the day, the goal is always about making transformational medicines for patients. And I always keep my eyes on the prize. And the prize is what can we do that's different than what the industry is able to do today. And why is that important? It's not like a personal, mantra. It's more than that. It's the service that we're all in. I was talking about it yesterday. I mean, there's about $200 billion in R&D spent. That's spent every year. And we get how many medicines? We had like about 55 that were approved last year. So if you do the math, the success rate is low. The cost is very high because the failure rate is high. So many people have talked about it. I don't want to be another person talking about it. Let's do something about it. That's what I want to bring into Recursion.
That's great. I love how you start from the value you really want to create for patients to the work you do now every day. Yesterday, you also mentioned 80% of diseases currently don't have a treatment available. What top 5 diseases would you prioritize for Recursion and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, and by that comment, it's really around the fact that there's a lot of white space, right, in terms of where we can innovate. Areas that have therapeutics, but there's still resistance, for instance, or areas that have literally the standard of care hasn't changed in the last couple of decades. So from a therapeutic area perspective, oncology, absolutely. I mean, over 50% of Recursion's portfolio is now in the precision oncology space. And with the potential combination with Exscientia, the announcement was made some time ago. Once that closes, it's going to be more than 50% of our clinical stage portfolio is oncology. The other area that's going to be important is, of course, immunology as well. In the combined entity, and let me just kind of share some numbers. From a clinical stage perspective, there's about 8 plus, clinical stage programs, again, more than half in oncology. Preclinically, 10 plus programs. And then from a partnership perspective, there's 4 partnerships, Sanofi, Roche, Genentech, Bayer, and Merck KGaA, where there's also a mix of oncology and immunology programs. So that's the second therapeutic area. The third one I would say is in rare diseases. That's where the company started in terms of some of the monogenic and other rare diseases as well. And given the partnership with Roche Genentech, that's also primarily focused in the neuroscience space. So look, when you think about oncology, immunology, neuroscience, rare diseases, you're covering quite a bit of space. The question I always get is how do you focus? And I think that's going to be another thing that I'm really focused on, no pun intended, in terms of how do we ensure that we have molecules that are differentiated so that we have the right to win, right? You want to make things transformational, you have to bet on the right areas.
Great, thank you. And yesterday you also spoke passionately about accelerating the time from, you could say, discovery to bringing medicines into the market, especially in these, you could say, continuously emerging disease areas. How do you see AI will continue to help accelerate the development process, but also equally, what could get in the way of us being successful achieving that?
So are you focusing specifically on development or both discovery and development? Okay, on development. Look, when we think about clinical development, and I've said this before and the stats are pretty clear, like 70%, up to 70% of the dollars used to make a medicine, some of the stats I was saying, actually hits in clinical development. And then the question is, why is it so high? Look, number one, the way we design, and we talked about this at the panel, it's important to design, stating the obvious, design things right. How do we design a clinical trial today? A lot of it is dependent on previously how it was designed, some KOL input. That's super important. But are we actually looking at the natural history of the patients in the real world? This is where a lot of the real world data comes in. Not just, sometimes people talk about real world data and they're focused on external control arms and would the regulators say yes or no. Bring it down a level. How about just using it for design? Right? And we're starting to do that actually at Recursion as well. We're building that out where you're leveraging real world data to really understand what does a true patient population today looks like, what is the current standard of care, how long are they staying on therapy, what are the appropriate inclusion, exclusion, and then let's simulate. Just like we simulate molecules using generative AI and predict what the properties are going to be, can we simulate trials in order to get a sense of what the outcomes are going to be? The probability of operational success, that's really important. If 80% of programs don't recruit on time, wouldn't you prefer to know that stat before you go into the trial or start the trial? I would say yes. So there's a huge element about designing in a much more smarter way. That's like one big pillar. And I would say it's, a lot of times people ask me about clinical development, how do we accelerate? Accelerating is important. But equally, if not more important, is actually improving your probability of success, effectiveness, and efficiency.
Yeah.
So I think that's one piece. The second thing I'll also mention is, we again talked in the panel yesterday about precision medicine, and I'm sure a lot of people have talked about precision medicine. But how do you drive precision medicine? That's a discovery, development, connect. What do I mean by that? As we use more multi-omics data, getting a better sense of not just what pathways are at play, but then translating that into the patients, which patient segments would respond better to a certain therapy versus not. That actually starts in discovery, but the value, if you do it right, plays out in development. And at Recursion, we're starting to do that using causal AI and a lot of the multi-omic data that we have in-house, but also commercially licensed. That helps you in development because you're going after the right patient. Again, another aspect of improving your effectiveness. And then the third thing I'll say is around running clinical trials. My gosh, it takes a long time. And why? Because a lot of the time you're looking for patients hoping they join your trial. Well, maybe there's a smarter way of doing it, which is, again, you use a lot of the real world data that exists today. You de-identify it, which is how it's shared. You can have machine learning algorithms on top of that, and what you get out of it is predictions on where the eligible patient populations you're looking for exist. You won't know the patients, of course, because it's de-identified, but you have a sense of which sites. That's a smarter way. It's like a Google Maps, right? Instead of me taking a map and going to where you live and asking everybody down the road to say, does she live here? Use Google Maps. It's far more efficient. That is an efficiency play, right? And it's also a diversity play. because you end up going to locations you wouldn't have gone because you let data lead you to where the patients are. Isn't that a much more patient-centric approach? I think the whole industry should be using approaches like that. I think some, I mean, I've done that in my prior life, and you see the value. You see 2 to 3x acceleration. I think especially given the cost of clinical trials, if you can make that more efficient, it allows you to repurpose and create more value for other programs that are in play as well.
It's great, and on one side you're talking about smarter ways to utilize the data that we have access to. On the other side, yesterday was also discussed around empowering patients with data, making sure they are aware what's going on in their health conditions so they can access those trials and participate. If you think about the access and utilization of real-world data for the benefit, obviously for drug development and achieving better patient outcomes, what would be some of the barriers that you would run into, knowing that there's obviously a fragmented landscape in terms of legal requirements, data privacy concerns?
It's a great question. And to answer your prior question too, what gets in the way?
Yeah.
Right, what gets in the way, look, there's data elements. Like if I had a magic wand and if we had a beautiful, like one integrated, interoperable data set for all of the US, that would be fantastic. That is claims, EHR, lab results. We don't have that. But I do think the ecosystem has done a good job of aggregating some of the data sets. Again, the examples I mentioned, these are directional. Like, right, they're directional. You're trying to get a sense of where you should go. You're trying to get a sense of like, would you have operational challenges or a sense of like inclusion, exclusion. The way we do it is very artisanal. This just makes it better.
Yes.
Now, if you talk about, external control arms, that it's challenging. The methods are still evolving because there's a lot of data missingness. That's why I didn't mention it as one of the first examples. Another approach to it, and which is something my team has worked on before, is having prospective studies that are real-world studies. So they're running in parallel to your active arm, but they don't have the same issues as having a placebo, but they also, or one that's standard of care, or they don't have some of the issues of retrospective data, so prospective versus retrospective. The other big challenge, to be very frank, and I've mentioned this before, and it's exciting to see that change in the landscape, is culture and ways of working, right? I mean, like, I didn't even talk about protocol automation and all of the other efficiency plays you can do, but one of the first things that comes up is it won't work before people have tried it. The second thing comes up is it works a little, but I can do it better. Interesting. The third thing, I mean, this is the whole kind of curve of acceptance. The third thing that comes up is I'm worried. Are you going to need me anymore? And I always try to explain it and I've seen people who've done it well is, in the 1990s and even 2000s, radiologists use a lot of AI machine learning now embedded in the device. Radiologists got replaced by radiologists who know how to use AI ML. So I always say it like akin to like having a really smart analyst. Who wouldn't want that? So it's about leaning in and learning
those tools.
Yeah, I mean, that's about evolution. We've done that for decades, right? So this is just another area to lean in and learn versus resisting, because the world is going to evolve. And are you in, are you out? And I think that's a very personal decision. The second part of it is also the third thing that gets in the way is people apply it to things that are not useful. Honestly, like picking the question is one of the most important things you do. I've heard people say, okay, let's build a whole multi-omic stack for every biology in the world. I'm like, yeah, that's going to take 10 years. And what's going to be the value proposition? Why don't we focus in areas where we need to create medicines, solve problems that matters, then you've earned the right to do more. So test, learn, iterate, scale.
Yep. And not fall in love with the technology, as you say, just because we have access to it.
No.
Just to build on what you mentioned regarding culture and mindset that we need to bring to make the change and to use these tools effectively. How do you handle culture at Recursion? And do you look for other kind of industries where you get inspiration from how they approach problems and really drive meaningful, lasting change?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's ever one good example of an industry to follow when you're creating something new, right? There's no blueprint for it. I think one thing that's really the secret sauce of Recursion is that it has started as whether we want to call it tech bio or biotech, but a true excellence in disciplines in both areas. both on the computational side and the science side. That's incredibly important. That openness, that mindset. I mean, when I look at the team, like a majority of them have been in pharma before, a majority of them have been in biotech before, a majority of them have been in tech before, but it's the mindset that's different. There's no first class, second class citizen.
Yep.
That happens a lot in other more established companies, which means is that there's an openness to try and an openness to deliver. Because you can experiment for some time, but if you don't deliver, it doesn't matter. That's what I always tell my teams. So I think that is a huge difference. And then the other thing I think that in the culture that's probably taken more from the tech side is this virtuous cycles of learning, quick iteration of learning, right? You don't just do a trial, okay, it's going to run for the next year and a half. Yep. No, it's this constant hunger to learn and innovate. That sense of urgency, it's really good. I think the other thing that's taken from pharma/bio, is what questions do you answer? If you want to disrupt an industry, I do believe you have to have a true appreciation for the industry. Keep the things that those industries do well, innovate what they don't do well. Combined, you're more successful. I think sometimes there is a tendency to just break things for the sake of it. But a smarter company is going to be one that takes the best of both worlds.
Great.
And I think you have the people, the strategy, the conviction to be able to do that. Listen, it's hard work, right? It's hard work to do something no one has done before, but like I always say, with where our healthcare industry is, the cost being unsustainable, so many medicines, so many patients waiting, there's no option not to try.
It sounds like you're not settling and your team doesn't settle for the status quo. It's constant learning, indeed, finding what is the next question that we need to find answers to and how can we apply technology in the smartest way.
And also the learnings, like
yes.
What is it that we've done that hasn't worked?
Yeah.
I mean, like, we're in, so I think on the R&D side, you're constantly learning that, and I think the commercial side is, listen, we really need to have our ear to the ground to what the patient needs, the payers, quite frankly, the physicians, right? All of the various stakeholders, and how do we put that integrated learning loop? We've talked about it. So many people have talked about it, right? To do that, we're not set up the right way in most cases to do that. So that's another area for us.
No, it's a great point. At the moment, it's still very much going from one cycle.
Very siloed.
Yes, yeah. Great. So one final question, actually, how would you summarize the main difference between Recursion and other biotech companies in a similar stage?
That's a good question. Look, I mean, I think there's a few things that are different. Number one, but before I talk about the differences, I'm just going to touch on the similarities too.
Yeah.
The similarities, I think we're all trying to make medicines for patients that are different and transformational. I think we all know it's hard. And just like most pharma companies or biotech companies, there's a portfolio and then there's a platform you focus on. I think what's unique about Recursion is the platform is an end-to-end AI suite, starting from biology, biological insights using phenomics and other multi-omics data, 50 petabytes of data generated in the last several years. It's not just about functional assays, it's about doing it in a very standardized, industrialized way. I think that makes it very unique. Now with the combination with Exscientia using generative AI and active learning to really upscale what we can do on the chemistry side. We're doing great work, but like to really advance and accelerate it. And then what we talked about on the clinical development AI side. All of that is leveraging AI where AI can be valuable, not for the sake of it, but where it can be valuable. So what that ends up is, the fact that the numbers, right? If you have 8 things in the clinic, you have 10 in your preclinical, 10 plus with partners, that kind of volume can only happen if you do things at scale, right?
Yeah.
But what is even more important is that we keep the quality high. Data-driven, progress what is highest value. So I think those things make it different, and also the talent. It's truly bilingual talent. I am so impressed by that. Almost trilingual is where I'm trying to go. So I've always talked about being bilingual, like science and computer science, but I want every leader to actually be a leader, which means understanding strategy, understanding business, understanding what question you should be answering, because that takes that talent pool to that next level. So you're not just doing interesting work, but you're doing it with a purpose of value creation. And when you have that, I think that is a very powerful combination that if you look at some of the leading companies and other industries, they do have. And so we're trying to instill that as well. And I think that's quite unique.
That's a great point. Also in our philosophy, we always think of, it's not molecules who determine the success, it's the human decision making, it's the team working with those molecules. So.
That's an excellent point. Like sometimes people don't talk about business and science together. And I do think the business aspect helps you to understand what questions you want to pursue and what decisions you want to make. And I think the more we can take scientists and data scientists and really elevate them, that was a pleasure of being able to do that at J&J. I think that makes a massive difference, not just for the company, but for the company of companies that will be generated by the next layer of leaders that are coming.
Yeah. Great. I know we're up against time. This has been very insightful. Thank you for sharing your experience and what you see is next. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.